Welcome to Before You Go, the podcast where we have open and honest conversations about death, grief, and the way that we remember. I'm your host, Matt Brook, and this series is produced in collaboration with Wesley Group and Impica PR. If you've been enjoying these conversations, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people and keep these important discussions going. Today, we're talking about how cremation choices are changing from traditional attended services to the rise in direct cremation. Joining me is Ross Hickton, Managing Director of Hickton Family Funeral Directors and current National President of SAIF. Ross represents a fourth-generation funeral family in the West Midlands, serving hundreds of families each year. In this episode, we'll explore what these changes mean for families, for funeral directors, and for the way that we say goodbye, and how we can make sure that whatever the choice meaning isn't lost along the way. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to discuss direct cremation, attended funerals, and the way the current market's going.
For anybody that doesn't know about you, would you be able to share a little bit of your story with us?
Yeah, so as Matt briefly touched on the intro, I'm a fourth generation funeral director working in my family business, established in 1909 in Cradley Heath, which is now part of the Black Country, so just on the outskirts of Birmingham. We've now got 7 funeral homes and a memorial masonry business, which is separate to the funeral business. I've been in the business now nearly 20 years, so quite literally straight from school, straight into the family business, working in every area of the business. We were a lot smaller when I first came in, so that gave me the sort of opportunity to have to work in every area of the business, which now we're a bit bigger, gives me a great overview on all areas and departments in the business because I've done every element of the business basically. As well as being managing director of the family funeral business, I'm currently National President of SAIF. So SAIF is the largest trade association of funeral directors currently in the UK with around 1,000 members. I've served on its National Executive Committee for the last 7 years and National President since March this year. So it takes up quite a lot of my time being President, but it's very worthwhile meeting, seeing other funeral directors, getting to know our sort of associate businesses, crematorium groups, cemetery groups, suppliers, and really just seeing the whole value chain from start to finish and ensuring families are receiving the best quality of service they can.
Absolutely, and we'll talk a little bit about your role in SAIF in particular a little bit later on. But to kind of go back a little bit, you mentioned that you have been in the industry for 20 years. You came out of school and straight into the family business. So you've grown up in the profession. You will have seen a lot of change, not only for Hickton family funeral directors, but also within the industry. What's your earliest memory? What's the earliest memory that you've got of the industry when you first came out of school?
My first earliest memory was probably being about 8 or 9 years of age. So every Saturday morning, my dad would take me, my brother and my sister down to the funeral home where my granddad lived. So he could go out, do his shopping, do what he needed to do. And there was always somebody in the funeral home to answer the door and answer the phones. This was pre-mobile phones, pre-internet. So there always had to be someone on site. So my earliest memories of being around the business is that really Saturday morning, walking through the garage, seeing the hearses, seeing the coffin stock room, and then sitting in the old front lounge and hearing the phones ringing when my granddad was out and my dad was sort of covering. But then I came into the business not really having a clue, understanding what was about it. I sort of helped out in the school holidays, cleaning cars, bearing on funerals now and again. Then I came in, 16, 17 years of age, never worked anywhere else, and walked into a business I did not have a clue about, didn't know how other funeral businesses worked. I thought the way we did things was the way everyone did things. You soon learn that a lot of funeral businesses have different ways, different appearances, and I wanted to really get out there and sort of drag ourselves into the 21st.
When you mention like that, Did you know that at that age that this was going to be for you?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I remember being at school and people asking me, "Oh, obviously your family are funeral directors. What does that mean?" I don't really know myself, to be honest. I think I always saw myself as having some kind of involvement, but doing something else. I mean, at school, I really wanted to do IT and computers. That's where I wanted to end up going into. It was the early noughties, IT and computers were becoming quite prevalent. But it was a very challenging time back then. Everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. Everybody was learning coding. Everybody was learning how to build computers. So you had to really be at the top of your game to do it. So I think sliding into the family funeral business was quite an easy fit. And because I had that sort of bit of knowledge around IT and computers, I implemented computers into the business and systems. And one of the first things I said to my dad was, "Oh, what's the company email address?" "Well, what's an email address? What's email?" Explained. "Right, okay, well, that's fine, but what's the cost for that?" And then I explained. He goes, "Right, okay, we'll get that sorted." And I said, "Well, we've got the internet." "No, we haven't got the internet." So it was really pulling things into the 21st century, and now I couldn't imagine it being any different, to be honest.
I don't think anyone could, to be honest with you. The way that we, within sector have to operate and communicate with families of, well, some around the corner and some on the other side of the world. I just don't think it would be possible to give the level of service that you give now, to be honest with you.
No, not at all. And I mean, I remember going back to, every letter or document was sent by fax, or, we'd send invoices to families and they'd all be hand delivered or sent in the post. And now I look at what we sort of spend on stamps and how much post goes out the business. It's hardly anything. Everything is digital. That does bring its other pitfalls and challenges, that people expect quicker replies and, contacting you over a weekend out of hours. Funeral businesses have always had to adapt, and I think this is just another adaptation of where we've been going over the years.
There'll be more to come. So 20 years is a long time to be within any profession. What keeps you motivated beside the family side of it? What keeps you motivated to remain in the sector?
I think it's always striving to give the best level of care and service you can. I mean, there's a lot of funeral directors out there, some good practice, some bad practice. You always are aware of what other companies are doing, and you always want to try and be that little one step forward, one step ahead, delivering better care, better service, better premises, better turnout on the day. So I think that does drive me and keeps pushing me forward. And also looking at our own business, what areas can we improve and what else can we do? We've got a couple of roles vacant at the moment as we film this, and I literally had a chat with my sister this morning. Do we look at bringing in a social media person to handle that side of the business? But then from that social media, they can also look after all our order of services, because we do all those in-house, all our online obituaries, all our online stationery, in-house stationery. These days, with, as we touched on, I suppose, coincidentally, computers and IT, the limits are endless, really, of what you can bring in-house, and finding good skills, but also finding people and skills who haven't got a funeral background, come from a completely different area of the world, but what they can add to your business is added value.
Absolutely. It's stuff I mention quite often, but I always used to joke and say that I often find with this industry, people fall into it and either fall in love with it or fall out of it quite quickly. And I often pose the question, it won't actually be of any pause to you, because you're the complete opposite, is I say to them, think back to when you were at school and think, who said that they wanted to work in a funeral home or in a crematorium? And the answer was nobody, unless you worked in a family business or your parents had a family or funeral director. So you obviously fit into the category of that. But it's true. I mean, you have to have a heart, right? You have to have your heart in the right place, and you want to be able to do right by people. And a lot of that other stuff can obviously be taught around it, but fundamentally you need to be a good fit for the funeral industry. We mentioned about you being the National President for SAIF, which I think, if I'm right, you're about halfway through, maybe just over your year-long tenure. What are you most proud of achieving or influencing so far?
Yeah, so I am just over halfway through now, finished March 26. Biggest thing, we had our National Education Day 3 Saturdays ago in Leicester, and we're doing a lot around direct cremation. One of my key pillars and goals for the year is to try and educate the public and funeral directors on direct cremation. Now, we did all our national road shows, so I was up and down the country hosting SAIF regional meetings. And then when I was in other areas attending other associations, banquets or events on behalf of SAIF, I'd make an effort to go out and see our members in those areas where we might not hold regional meetings. Explain what I was hoping, well, what I'm planning to achieve, and that we had our National Education Day where we were providing a lot of training, launching new toolkits. It'd be great for them to come along. And Education Day came a few weeks ago, and it was our highest attended ever Education Day. There was a lot of new faces, new companies in the room, and the majority of those new faces and companies that came were the ones I made the effort to go out and visit as I've been on the road throughout the year. And I felt a real great sense of pride in that they'd really taken in what I'd said, and they want to grow and better themselves with their families they serve. And I felt quite proud about that. They'd never attended these days before.
I was fortunate enough to speak at the event. And I was shocked, genuinely shocked to see the number of people in the room. I think I've spoken at the last three SAIF education days, and it's grown. It was very clear and obvious how much it had grown, and a lot of the conversation that was buzzing around during the intervals and lunch and things like that. You could tell that there was a real want to be there from those that had attended. It was a fantastic day, a fantastic opportunity to speak to funeral directors from all over the country. We've seen a real rise in direct cremations over the last few years. I was just going to ask you, from your perspective, what's driving that change, do you think?
I think the biggest engine pushing that train is Pure Cremation, the online TV company, spending a fortune on TV marketing. You know, they are a really good marketing machine. We're calling it the Hoover effect. So Pure Cremation offer a product that's called or known as direct cremation, unattended cremation, where nobody attends the cremation. There is no service. There's generally no viewing or preparation of the deceased. Pure Cremation have really cornered that market, and families now actually use the phrase, "Oh, mum wants a pure cremation." They've coined it. It's called the Hoover effect, where obviously vacuum cleaners are the name of the machine, but everybody refers to it as a Hoover, which was a brand from obviously the 50s and 60s. So pure cremation are the biggest driver. Unfortunately, the sort of data and research we've seen speaking to families, they don't fully understand what they're actually buying. And the message I'm trying to get across and what I'm trying to achieve in the public point of view is speak to your local funeral director, go and sit down with somebody face to face and have a chat about mum or dad or your wishes. Is a direct cremation the right fit for you and your family? And then they've made what's called an informed decision. They've been given all the information. They can take it away and then think about what's best for them. But more importantly, what's best for their family.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. From what we see, there is quite a big educational gap in what a direct cremation is and what a traditional service is. I must admit, I've had a few personal interactions with people at various trade shows and things like that, where people have come up and asked us a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and whether we deliver exactly what you've said in terms of a direct cremation. And we say, well, we do, yeah, but actually, do you know about this, and this as well? And I think one of the shout outs that we need to look at is probably about the long term impact of direct cremation on the grieving process, and perhaps whether what is involved in that direct process is enough at the moment in terms of being able to say goodbye and getting the closure perhaps that a family might need as part of that journey. What sort of things do you think families should reflect on when they're making those sorts of decisions? What do you think their key drivers should be?
I think if you split this in half, you've got families who have lost somebody. There's no prepaid funeral plan in place. Then you've got the other side of the coin, where the other 50% of people, they think direct cremation is the right choice because mum always said, don't spend the money, don't have a service, don't have the faff and the fuss. Now, if you take the faff and the fuss, in a funeral, be that a big celebration of life or a small intimate funeral service, isn't a faff, it isn't a fuss at all. It's the most natural thing anybody could do at the end of someone's life. Now, that doesn't have to be a black hearse, 3 black limousines, 300 people in church, followed by a cremation, and then a banqueting hall for the reception. That could just be 10 close family members in a lounge around their loved one, saying goodbye, and then having a short committal at the crematorium. As long as people are getting together and mourning and celebrating that person's life, that is a really good step on the grief ladder and starting the grief process. On the other side of that, as I mentioned, you've got a number of people who pre-plan their funerals, pre-arrange, pre-book and pay up front at today's cost. People have been doing that for the last 25, 30 years. And it's only really been in the last 6 or 7 that people have opted for the direct cremation option, so no one attends their funeral. So what we say is, and what the message we're trying to get across is, if you are thinking of pre-planning or pre-paying for your funeral, speak to your family about it, ask them what their thoughts are, because, you know, a great saying is that a funeral isn't for the dead, it's for the living, because it's the living who are left to pick up the pieces and decide how they think they should feel and how they feel their loved one's funeral should be. So if you are considering a prepaid funeral plan and you don't want anybody to attend, make sure you've spoke to your family and your friends about that. I was talking to a funeral director the other day, and he was talking to the local postman in his village. And he then found out that he was having a direct cremation because the family didn't live locally. And they thought, well, that's the better option because we live miles away. We've said bye to Dad over the years. There's no need to have a funeral service. Now, that postman got really upset about that because he checked in on that chap nearly every other day. And he said he would have loved to have the option to be able to go and say goodbye and mourn that person's life. Now, yes, it does sort of make sense that if you do live far away from your loved one and their death was pretty imminent or it was coming, and you've said your goodbyes leading up to it, you know, there is a justification there for an unattended cremation. But you've got to think about the local community, think about the friends, the neighbours who might not have known they were in that such poor condition and they want a chance to grieve and say goodbye. It's the real communities that are missing out and not being able to say goodbye and not realising that person's passed away, unfortunately. So it's talking, it's having conversations with family, friends, neighbours, if there's a need for a funeral service. And I think if you spoke to most people, 95% would, they'd say, yes, we'd love to attend, we'd love to see and say goodbye to Jeff down the road. He's always said hello to us. That's the least we can do is take half an hour out of our busy schedule to say goodbye.
Absolutely. I just want to double down on what you were saying about having those conversations as well, because it is a conversation we have quite often in our house, funnily enough, because obviously working in the industry, you're up close and personal with it. And I often say to my family around me, well, what is it that you want though? And the truth is that often they don't know, but I say to them, just imagine the scenario where you've passed and I'm grieving for you and I don't know what you want. It actually makes my grief harder because I've also then got to second guess, what it is that you want and whether I'm doing the right thing and all those sorts of things. So I think it is incredibly important to have that conversation with families and just say, look, can you just tell me a little bit about what you want, or maybe you write it if they're not comfortable with it, you write it down somewhere and just say, if you need it, this is where it is. For example, mine are in the back of a little black book. It's got where it's got to be, who's doing the funeral, etc., etc. So just, I think it is really important that people have that conversation and let their loved ones know, because otherwise, I think you're right. There is a bit of a lean towards, maybe not necessarily always the right option. I think I'm keen to use that sort of terminology because a direct cremation or an unattended service works for some people for a number of reasons. But actually, every paper that we pick up about traditional services, people are wanting to do some form of personalisation. They want to have some sort of hand in saying goodbye, whether that's helping form a visual tribute or helping decorate the coffin, or picking the music. There are so many layers to it. So I just wanted to kind of double down on your point there. How do we, as a sector, make sure that the families still find meaning in those services, Ross?
Talking. The biggest challenge at the moment is getting the families to come and sit down and talk to us, because there's a certain percentage which are just going directly online. They are just going straight and picking up the phone, and there's no physical human contact. We have families who think they want a direct cremation, think it's the right thing to do to start with. But as soon as they sit down in one of our funeral homes and we explain the different options, straight away they change their mind. No, we can't be having that. We need something. We need this. We need that. And what you touched on, Matt, around personalisation, that is the key now, really. You look back 15 years, every single funeral was the same. Now, with the advent of the internet and online options and people being able to research in their own homes and seeing what's available, we have to adapt and be able to offer those services. So visual tributes, that's a brilliant way to remember someone's life. Putting together a slideshow, 25, 50, 75 photos and videos to be displayed during a funeral service is amazing. That provides a lot more reflection for the family than someone speaking a eulogy. If they can see videos and images, it brings back memories. It brings back, I remember them in the 1960s dressed like that, seeing them down the local club. It brings back memories, and that also then opens up people speaking at the wake. Thoughts, memories, stories. Stories are the key, really. It's what helps people grieve, because you bring light to a dark situation.
Yeah, brings a different richness, I think, to the whole experience. Yeah. Is where you're headed with that. No, I mentioned about the visual tributes, and one thing I often recognise when we're in the services is the audible gasps from different sections of the congregation when a certain photo comes up, because, like you say, it gives you that opportunity kind of to touch everybody within the room. Because when you talk about eulogy and they talk about their version of events or a version of someone's life, when you then have those pictures, you hear you hear the tears, you hear the laughter, you hear the howl at the back and things like that from something that they remember. That is just one of the many ways where I think families are taking it up a level and remembering it in a slightly different way. Prior to us starting the pod, you mentioned about kind of people not always seeing and understanding the 24/7 nature of funeral care. Can you give us a glimpse of what that looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, the key driver, and every funeral director has had to provide this service since the advent of time, really, is obviously people don't pass away at certain times and dates in certain locations. They pass away anywhere, everywhere, anytime or day of any time of the day or night, 7 days a week. So every funeral business has to offer a 24/7 service. As I touched on years ago, that would have been having somebody at the funeral home 24/7 because there were only landlines, and before landlines, there was only people who could give death arrangements. Obviously, with mobile phones, VoIP phones these days, you can turn an app on your phone and have access to your entire phone system anywhere you are in the world. So we've always got 2 members of staff on call. They go out, they collect every single deceased that passes away outside of working hours from homes, care homes and nursing homes. They bring them back into our care and they're looked after until the next working day when we speak to that family and start making the funeral arrangements. So that's one element of the 24/7 service we have to provide. But since the internet became a lot more prevalent, social media, I wouldn't say we get a lot, but we get the odd few families contact us over social media to notify us that their loved ones passed away. And you've got to be able to monitor that and respond as soon as possible. Business WhatsApp, we have to have business WhatsApp these days to communicate with clients. And sometimes they will message on there or they'll phone you on that number any time of the day to notify you of the death or ask questions. People lie in bed at night during funeral arrangements and everything's going through the mind, and they might just drop you an email or drop you a message, and you've got to be able to respond to that. I'm not saying straight away, but within a timely fashion, because that's the way they've thought about it, and they've then expressed that message to you on that platform. Whereas years ago, they would have picked up the phone or popped in. But these days, a lot of younger people are more used to social media and messaging apps and not having that human contact and picking up the phone and talking to somebody. So you've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to manage these channels and speak to people on whatever platform they want to speak to you on.
Do you think that the remote nature of how things can be done now has maybe taken a certain kind of appreciation away for the funeral industry and what it is that funeral directors actually do?
I think to a degree, but I think it also depends how you manage your business. So COVID, for example, so during COVID, we couldn't see people face to face. So a lot of our funeral arrangements were done online over Team or Zoom. And there was some chatter in the funeral sector. Well, will this stay now? Will families not bother coming in? Have we as funeral directors got lazy and we'll just offer every family online meetings? And it never stuck. Don't get me wrong, we now are more geared up to do those kind of arrangements if families want them. But in our experience, they're very few and far between. The only time it's an online meeting is if they live in another part of the country or another part of the world. But they still generally will come in to see us. And I think we as funeral businesses, funeral directors, funeral arrangers, we need to hold on to that. We need to see people. We need to get them in our office. We need to get a feel for what they want. We don't want to lose that human touch, that human element. I recently used a solicitor to do a bit of work for me. Met him online, didn't meet him in person. He was only down the road, but there was just no need to do any of that face-to-face. They felt it was comfortable to do it online. So it was all done online. I think one challenge we are going to face is AI and agents. So I was talking to somebody recently who's recently transitioned into the prepaid funeral planning market, and he used to work for a SME bank, and he commented that the law profession, bigger companies, are now setting up AI agents where if somebody was to go onto OpenAI and say, I need a solicitor in Birmingham to convey my house, I want to spend between £2,000 and £3,000 and I want to meet them tomorrow at 3:00. You'd plug that into AI and the bot would go out and speak to other solicitors who've got that function, and the AI within a matter of seconds will check their price list, they'll check their diary, they'll check their availability, they'll book an appointment and put it in your calendar on your phone or within a matter of seconds. Now, that's all done without speaking to anybody because that solicitor is geared up to accept inquiries like that. Now, the conversation I was having with it was, will that transition to funeral directors? Will we be at a point where families will go onto a open AI and just put in mom's passed away at Dudley Hospital. We want to spend £4,000 on the funeral. We want the funeral on the 23rd of March at 3 o'clock. Go and find this for me. Now, I was thinking about this afterwards on the drive home. There's a lot of elements there that need to be pieced together for that to work. The crematoriums will have to link into the funeral director's diary. The funeral director will need to link into their fleeting diary. And they'd also have to make sure they've got staff available. So there's a lot of hurdles to get that process. But I don't think we're actually that far away from that sort of system being put in place. But with that system in place, making that booking online is all doable, but you still need to see that person. That person still needs to come in because if they're going to view their loved one, they could view their loved one remotely through a webcast or online. Whether or not that will take off, I don't know. But the beauty of funeral directors is people still need to see their loved ones. And that's one thing we can't push digitally. It's one thing we can't forget. So I think there always will be a need for physical funeral directors' presence and physical funeral directors seeing physical people during that arrangement process.
There's that sensitivity as well with it, because if you were to use your experience of a solicitor, that's more transactional, isn't it? You know, this isn't. This is something where you need to be able to deliver certain messages in certain ways and things like that, and also in some cases manage people's expectations and give them alternatives. And if you do everything by email, you know, people interpret email in a number of different ways at the best of times, let alone when perhaps you're in a more of a vulnerable state or an emotional state, and actually you think, well, I can't believe Ross has emailed me that, you know, in that tone, when actually yours has been completely, you know, professional and things like that. So I think you're probably right. I don't know that you can operate like that. And when you talk about the AI stuff, it kind of blows my mind, because I think probably the most obvious AI thing will probably be the scripture that comes along with eulogies and tributes and things like that to begin with. But it is quite scary to think that you could get into a place where effectively a funeral could be arranged in a matter of seconds, or at least the outline of it, without even speaking to someone. My hope is that it never goes that way, because families need your advice and guidance. They really do, to be able to make sure that they maximize the experience in the most positive way that they can, and they get everything out of the process that they need in order to be able to adapt to a new routine and a new way of living, as it is for so many people. But it's certainly a scary thought from my bit anyway. Another thing that I know you speak about quite often is regulation and national standards. Why do you think that they're so important for the future of bereavement care?
Well, because at the moment, there actually aren't any statutory regulations or legislation around care of deceased and the delivery of a funeral in England, Wales, or Northern Ireland. So Scotland became semi-regulated in March. They have to abide by a code of practice for all Scottish funeral directors that was set by the government. So they have to operate their businesses to that level and standard. Unfortunately, there is still no national register of funeral directors. So anybody could still set up a funeral business as long as they're abiding by that code of practice in Scotland. So what SAIF and the NAFD are doing is we're adopting the Scottish Code of Practice for funeral directors in Scotland and introducing that to England, Wales and Northern Ireland as of next year. So we can display to the government that we've got a unified step forward. The only two trade associations for funeral directors have one shared code of practice, which just so happens to be the code of practice which the Scottish Government have brought in for their funeral directors. So why do we need regulation? We've got to be careful with regulation. Regulation can put red tape and put barriers up to entry. However, sadly, over the course of the last number of years, there's been a number of bad funeral directors who've been caught in the press, not behaving correctly, not looking after deceased correctly, not charging correctly, and not returning ashes correctly. So there is a need for some level of regulation. I think we will see the number of funeral directors reduce because you'll have a lot of funeral directors who are in their 60s or 70s, who've worked in their family businesses all their lives, You've got no next generation in the business at all. Are they really going to want to have to upskill, train themselves, spend potentially tens of thousands of pounds of getting their premises to a better standard, a higher standard? I can't see that happening. But I think the advantage of regulation will be that there'll be opportunity for the other funeral businesses who may have younger leaders in them who are willing to take on those businesses and ensure those communities and people are best served and looked after. And in turn, that will only bring up the level of skill and care that all funeral directors offer across the UK to ensure families receive the best level of care and service they can.
Absolutely. Regulation is tricky because, like you said, with regulation comes costs, and that will sadly, but also in some cases positively lead to changes which will have definite outcomes for places. It will bring around mass amounts of change for many people. You've supported in your 20 years, I'm going to say thousands of families through loss. What does a meaningful farewell look like to you, Ross?
Meaningful farewell. Well, I would say it's a decent sized congregation at the crematorium. If they're religious, plenty of hymns, plenty of song, plenty of praise. If they're not religious, it's their favourite music. It's family and friends getting up, sharing stories. It's seeing the coffin. It's having a formal funeral service. But then I think the biggest element really is the wake afterwards, the reception, getting everybody together. My dad passed away 12 months ago now, actually, and he told us what he wanted. We had a big funeral. He loved horses, horse racing. We had 2 horses lead his favourite vintage hearse we have, with 2 limousines for the family, to the local crematorium. We had a visual tribute. We had his favourite music. We shared stories. We hired a hotel reception venue afterwards. We had 400 people at the wake. We had a saxophonist playing because he loved jazz music. We had a display table with all his memorabilia and bits he's collected over the years. And then when the wake finished, or the time finished at the hotel, a lot of us went to one of his local pubs where he used to drink and carried on sharing stories. And obviously I'm going to be biased because that was my dad's funeral. But that is a really good example of how a funeral can be. And I think because my dad didn't let anybody know that he was poorly and ill, when he did pass away, it was a massive shock to the whole community, to the whole business, because people within our own business didn't realise how bad he was. And I think having that opportunity to spend a full day sharing memories, having a drink, listening to his favourite music, watching videos, it brought a lot of closure to a lot of people. And that was a really good send-off.
We do always like to ask one more question before we finish, which is, before you go, what's the one thing you'd want families to remember when they're planning a farewell for someone they love?
Would it be cliche to remember coming together? That's what we've just
It might be in light of what we said. No, elaborate.
I think it is pulling people together, pulling communities together, sharing memories. One of the videos we've produced around direct cremation was a lady who sadly lost her mom the morning after her wedding day, and they had to have a direct cremation because that's what mom wanted. She'd prepaid that, and they went and followed her wishes. And the example she always gave was that when her family come together, the box opens when mom passed away. They talk about memories, they discuss it. But then when they're not all together, that box is closed and they've got no closure because there was no funeral. So the one thing I would say is remember to come together, remember to talk to your family, to your loved ones, and remember and celebrate that life.
That is an incredibly powerful point to finish on. Ross, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your thoughts and your passion for protecting, I think, what a truly meaningful funeral is. If you'd like to learn more about Ross and his work, Ross, where can people find out a little bit more about where you are and what you do?
So you can find me on social media, LinkedIn and Facebook mainly. My personal email address is on my company website, so tewhickton.co.uk, and I'll feel free to drop me an email and I'll always reply when I find the time.
And if today's conversation has made you stop and think, please remember to like, share and subscribe. It helps us keep these conversations going and reach more people who might need to hear them. And thank you very much for listening. Until the next time, bye-bye.